Hey everyone, I'm Michael Cade from Kasten by Veeam. I'm a senior technologist over there, and today in this live stream, I want to kind of touch on some of the learning projects and platforms that we've put together around the Kubernetes landscape, but also around data services and storage. The first one in particular is around learning.kasten.io. So I want to take the time to really just touch base on what it is, why it's here, what we're doing it for, but also then dive into actually having a look at what it is. So let's jump into it. So really, from a Kubernetes point of view, there's a massive community, but also there's what seems to be quite a daunting learning curve. And I think for me myself, about probably a year ago now, I started that ramp up to understand a lot more about the cloud native space, open source, Kubernetes itself, but also everything that comes with this whole cloud native ecosystem of technologies, and having to learn basically a foundational knowledge of a lot of different things and being that jack of all trades again, which is kind of what we saw way back, at least when I first started my career in IT, was very much having to have a bit of a knowledge of a lot of different areas of IT. So one of the things that we saw from a KubeCon point of view was a huge uptick over the last few years. You can see down the bottom here, we're listing off all of the major KubeCon events, and you can see that the attendance has grown in this community. So we're definitely talking to a lot more people, and again, for me in this community, and a kind of a relatively new person with only 9 to 12 months kind of experience here, but you can feel that there's a buzz around this learning curve and people wanting to learn more about DevOps, around cloud native, around Kubernetes, around containerization, and the why, and trying to get over that hump. And this is where what we've done at Kasten, or hopefully done at Kasten, is providing a free way of being able to get hands-on and understand a little bit more around this area, specifically around not just like building your own Kubernetes cluster and getting started that way, but also when it comes to stateful workloads and providing, and what is a persistent volume, and how do we provision a persistent volume for our databases or whatever that data service may be, and then okay, how do we provision that, but then how do we protect that as well? And there's a few different areas in which that comes, and then we've got a continuation of these labs that I'm going to touch on as well later on. But the biggest takeaway here, yes, this community is growing, and for any of you out there that have been to a KubeCon or even just a cloud native community event, like even a local user group, you know that the numbers from last year have grown significantly. And you can see here, maybe this is something to do with the virtual capability of being able to be on site and be virtual and be able to be involved is a huge thing. And that's potentially driven the adoption of people wanting to be here. But the big thing that we found at KubeCon EU back in May of this year was that around 70% of the attendees were actually first-time visitors, which generally says that we're all in the same boat of learning. We're learning something around this space. And I think it's all fair to say from a Kubernetes point of view, if we stick into Kubernetes cloud native DevOps, is there is an air of complexity. I think the learning curve that I at least thought was there to begin with isn't maybe as daunting once you get into it and you start finding the resources out there, of which there are plenty. But I think it's still fair to say that a lot of it is still complex, depending on your background. Now, if you've been in Linux for the last 20, 30 years, then you're probably going to walk into this and you're going to have a better understanding of everything that Kubernetes has to offer. Again, if you're a developer, you might also have that head start when it comes to where the platform that you're going to be running your application or code on may help. But then I think this cultural change as well, from this traditional IT where you would be doing everything manually and you'd be getting pretty much everything up and running yourself, is transitioning to, or how do we automate that? How do we make our life simpler by being able to automate some of our tasks so that we can that we can move faster and release quicker. And then a lack of training. I mentioned that there's if you go looking around you're either going to be paying a lot of money for a course, or you've got to go digging for a good course, and that takes a lot of time. So one of the things that we saw was, well, how do we enable that? How do we help fix some or all of these challenges with what we're doing with our new platform? So how do we fix complexity? How do we help transition from a change point of view between different technical cultures? But then also, how do we help bring that lack of training into, here's our training, and this is how we can help. And there's a few different areas, and I kind of touched on this. It's not just about the cloud native community, because Kubernetes is going to be widely interesting for a lot of different people, whether it's people that are coming out of college, whether it's people that are focusing on it because their business is wanting to move towards a Kubernetes platform or an infrastructure, or whether it's everything in between as well. Like it could be that it's a greenfield startup that needs a platform to run their mission critical application on. But the big thing here is, yes, the cloud native community, you've just seen it's growing, but there's a huge element to this that kind of goes hand in hand with Kubernetes and cloud native, is around open source. So there's a few tools that we've been developing from a Kasten point of view that I'll touch on as well towards the end of the session. And then being able to share and share not only expertise, people that are working in this space and have been for longer than me, the same as me, shorter than me, but have grasped and been able to really focus in on one of the key areas, but then provide that back, give that back to the community, learn in public, be able to share that out. So the first thing we want to really touch on, and this is where I'll probably dive into a bit of a live demo and walk through some of the elements of learning.kasten.io. But really what we focused on is creating a platform that provides free Kubernetes training. At the very top of the list is around how can we get you the fundamentals of Kubernetes very quickly, but in an interactive way. And doing that via, so one of the things that I'm like, people learn differently. People learn by videos, even more so probably through the pandemic. I know I've been addicted to YouTube and watching various training videos on there and technology videos. But some people like to read. Some people like to read blogs because they're short and concise and they get the message across. Some people like to read how-to guides or how-to blogs as well to actually follow along and get hands-on. Some people like white papers, the functional, like the deep technical architecture content. And some like hands-on, but the instructional led type hands-on. And then there's obviously classroom training as well, of which you can pretty much go onto Google or any of your search engines and find something that correlates to how you prefer to learn. But what we wanted to do here was kind of take all of our useful learning resources, put them together into one place that was free and accessible to all, and be able to give you the ability to work through those and pick up some badges along the way. Now, I will say that today we have 3 labs, or we have 4, including the KubeCon lab that you'll see is still there today. But the envision and the roadmap to that is that we move quite aggressively in that we want to release more. And that might be around different areas of data, and particular data and storage as a focus, and around data management to that degree as well. So you can see here that there's 3 labs over on the right-hand side. I don't think there's another slide to it. Yeah. So what you'll see is, so we launched it around KubeCon, really good numbers. People are adopting this. People are going, people are seeing it. Would love to hear from you in the comments down below if you've actually been through the labs. And feedback is the most important part to this, because without feedback, we can't progress and we can't iterate on what we're doing. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going in the same direction, which we don't know if that's right unless we hear from the community on how this is being used. But if we look at the 3 different labs that we have and the 3 labs that we'll focus on, and I'll focus on lab 1 today, but each lab has a YouTube video where you can sit and walk through it with me, or just obviously go along and do it yourself as well. And there's a few webinars that I've done and other people within the team have done that enable, like an intro to Kubernetes, for example, and that'll run through the theory that you kind of need to then move on and get into this, and to be more prepared when you get onto the hands-on piece. So the first lab is around building your first Kubernetes cluster. Now, I remember when I started to look into Kubernetes, and it was like, where do I go to get started? Now, I could go to one of the public cloud providers and spin up a managed Kubernetes environment, or I need to do something locally, and I could take something like Minikube or Kind or K3D. But they're all very daunting, and potentially it feels like you could potentially ruin your machine in not very long if you made a mistake. So what we were thinking here is that if we can give you a lab in a browser that gives you the ability to spin up an actual lab that you follow along the instructions to, but also it gives you freedom to go around and use kubectl and how you want to use that. So each of these labs up front, there's a bit of theory, and then it goes into the hands-on approach. I've fast forwarded that, so I'll go into the straight into the lab, and we'll walk through it together in the rest of the session. Then the second lab that we won't get to today will be around building a Kubernetes application. So deploying MySQL or Postgres or Mongo. And what does that look like from a persistent volume point of view? What does it look like from a persistent volume claim? How does it look? And all of this is inside of this web browser bubble, if you will. So yes, you can go freely around that, but you're not going to be exposing your mission critical production app. It does have internet access though. So if you wanted to pull down a particular Helm chart just to see what that process of deploying a Helm chart looks like, absolutely go ahead. It's time bombed. You're not going to get a ridiculous amount of time to play with in this lab, but it does give you that ability to roam around. And that for me is how I learn, is a bit of hands-on. But then with some instructions as well to some degree. Then once we've got that application up and running, whether it's one of those 3 data services or something else, well, how do we back that Kubernetes application? How do we back that data service up, including not only the persistent volume claim, but also how do we back up the secrets, the config maps, the actual pods itself? How do we get a grasp on that, and how do we protect that data? Then also, how do we simulate a failure and then recover that data back into production, or potentially into a clone of that? Now, I've found as well is that award process of, okay, I've done the first lab, the second lab, that gamification of that, the badge structure helps keep you interested and keeps you wanting to dive deeper. And this is going to expand further as we add further labs. The badges is only the gamification is going to get stronger, and it's going to be more of an experience to what it is today with the 3 labs and these badges that you see. Because basically, lab 1, 2, and 3 carry their own badge, and then you get the helmsman badge once you've completed labs 1, 2, and 3. So that's really the goal of the initial launch. And obviously, you can hopefully see how that progresses out there. Then the other area that I kind of wanted to touch on, and this is very, very new, and it's actively being worked on. And this is just an idea that I had. And going back to that, how do I get something up and running as fast as possible that enables me to extend my experience locally? So where I said about those labs being time bombed, well, how could I run something locally? And how could I run something locally on whatever operating system that may be? So some of us run Mac OS, some of us run Windows, some of us will be running Linux desktops. And I want a way to be able to run a local Kubernetes cluster so that I can have a quick way of being able to spin up a Kubernetes cluster so that I can play around. I can have an active look around. But then what this also brings is, so it brings the Kubernetes cluster very quickly. It deploys certain data services, and I'll touch on a bit more in this as well as we come out of the slides. But then it also deploys Kasten K10. Now, the big key here is that Kasten K10, from a data protection point of view, is only viable for x86 platforms. So if you're running a Mac OS the new M1 ARM chip, then Kasten K10 is not going to run on that. But particularly any Windows desktop, Windows laptop, Linux laptop, etc., they're going to be a viable solution to get this up and running. The underpinning technology that I used was around Minikube, so making it easy to learn. Kind of takes away the underpinning architecture and everything that you may want to still dig down into. I mean, going back to the in-between part, so you could go and roll your own within one of the public clouds, or you could go and use a Kind or a K3D on your local machine. Obviously, you could go and deploy a virtual machine and you could run Kubernetes the hard way and follow along Kelsey Hightower. In fact, if you want to know the architectural know-how of installing and implementing a Kubernetes cluster, and you need to know all of the bells and whistles underneath, then that's a really good way of having to go through that, and building it from scratch or doing it the hard way is a great way of doing that. But I just wanted to give a shout out to this because this brings that lab and that learning technique, and we're going to factor this into the learning experience as well, into the platform, and potentially gamify this in a way as well, in that you go and roll it on your own machine and then report back on a potential Easter egg that we've left in here. But by all means, this is a community-driven approach. We've already had a couple of contributors. We've got double figures in the stars. So people are using this. People are offering feedback and PRs for this. My ask is take a look, see if it's useful. If you find an issue, then put an issue into the GitHub repository, and we can definitely take a look at what that is, and try and make it a community-driven learning aspect to what we're trying to achieve. The other way in which this could really help is, so this is project pace, but me pulling it down into my local environment. This is using WSL on a Windows machine. And you'll see when you go to the GitHub repository that we have some various bash scripts. Now, I've created a single cluster demo, and in fact, since this video was created, I've actually updated this for that multi-cluster demo as well, which will go out and deploy 2 Minikube Kubernetes clusters, because one of the features of Kasten K10 is the ability to manage both of those clusters under one interface or one dashboard. So what this does is this will roll through, create that cluster. You can see using Minikube. Again, all the prereqs are listed in the README of the file. Another area, and I think I'll show it in the next slide, is we could actually use a project called Arcade. Arcade is think about it as an application marketplace or a package manager for Kubernetes. So you can see here that I run through some of the commands here using that bash script. But basically what it does, it deploys Kasten K10, it deploys MySQL, it deploys Postgres, it deploys MongoDB, and then provides you with the output to that, so that you can now jump into that, and you've now got at least a very fast cluster. You can see here, so age 10 minutes. I've obviously sped this up a bit, but this will be very dependent on the resources that you have on your machine. But at that point, I've now got the ability to go into that Kubernetes cluster and start protecting those data services that we also deployed in there. And this is just the Arcade piece. So obviously from a project pace point of view, some of the prereqs is Minikube needs to be installed on the system. You're going to need in fact, I'll probably run through it so that we know, but we can also use Arcade Kasten install as well here. Helm is another requirement as a prereq, and there's some others in there, like so Minikube. The reason why I chose Minikube for this project was simply because they have the add-on piece, so I can add on the CSI host path, which is what we can use to make a really fast snapshot of our data services. Where Arcade comes in is that I can literally go Arcade get, and I can run Arcade get Minikube, Arcade get Helm, and I can start to deploy all of these with one single command all into that one machine. So super simple in there as well. And kubectl as well to manage that piece. All of the K10 tools are also in there. So I'll come back to this slide just to share some of that. But if I jump to Project Pace, because we were just talking about that, you'll see that there's a pretty extensive README around how to get started. There's also some areas around, so Prereqs, Minikube, Helm, kubectl, easy to remember when I can actually read them. But Minikube also runs on a lot of different container or virtual machine managers. So I tend to steer towards using Docker, whether that be Docker Desktop or Docker from a Linux point of view. But if you're running on Mac OS, if you're running on Windows, if you're running on Linux, Podman, VirtualBox, you've got lots of different options as to how to deploy that. And here's that command for Arcade. Arcade, again, is just a simple curl command. And again, I've linked here on how to get that up and running. We'll be doing a webinar, actually, a live stream on the Arcade Lives or Alex Ellis's YouTube channel in a couple of weeks' time, where we'll be talking about in more depth around Arcade, the benefits of it. And there's some good blogs out there as well. If you're using Windows, you can obviously also use Chocolatey. Again, someone else has contributed this to say we could use Choc install Minikube, Kubernetes Helm, Kubernetes CLI, kubectl, etc. And then it's going through some of the other areas. So these are the add-ons that I mentioned. So I want to use volume snapshots and CSI host path. Now, I have gone through a bit of discovery around using MetalLB as well in order to spin up a load balancer within my cluster. And I'm still playing around with that. But if you look at, for reference, on my Ubuntu laptop, it took just under 7 minutes to get things up and running. That might be a bit longer now, actually. I probably need to update that because I've added further data services. However, they'll deploy those in parallel as well. You can see here that I can also, on my Ubuntu laptop, I've got VirtualBox, so I can leverage that. I know someone else on here has been using VMware Workstation. There's quite a substantial README here that walks you through. And you can use the bash script if you want, but you can equally go through and take all of these commands and do the same thing. So you get a better understanding of how this will work, because there's really three reasons why and how this will work. One is giving the capability to our own SEs to spin up an easy to spin up, fast way of being able to spin up Kasten K10 to show to our customers. But more importantly, it's for the community to see and get hands-on with learning a lot more about Kubernetes, but also data management. I feel like we always put data management at the bottom of our list because it's maybe not as exciting as other areas of learning. And then also around learning is probably the third big bullet point, is that how do we learn? And that if I can reduce that barrier of entry that I had when I first came and I had to put a credit card into one of the hyperscalers and I had to kind of work my way around getting that cluster up and running, this should ease that, because not everyone has a credit card that they want to put into the public cloud, because you've all heard the stories about how that ramps up in price and all of that bad stuff. So yeah, it goes through a lot of those details, but now I want to hopefully jump over to just quickly show. I've only got 5 minutes left. I said about it being a time-bombed environment, but really what it's doing is down the right-hand side, it's going to give you the instructions of what you need to do, and then you go through each of those, and you basically walk through each of these commands to then get up and running your Kubernetes cluster. So as much as I've copied that, I don't think it will work because I'm using the wrong browser. My advice is use Chrome here. Yeah. Obviously you can't, but if I was in another lab, then you could also, you can go and do whatever you want to this. It is a a mini Linux VM out there in the world, but segregated away in that you can't access that only via this platform. But you can go through, and this is, I've found, a really good way of also getting hands-on with Linux a little bit more. So being able to like add in these like things like our apt update, making sure that all our packages are up to date beforehand. But this goes through the Kube ADM, the addition of all of those clusters. I'm not even going to attempt to do that in 4 minutes, less than 4 minutes now. But then it's just a case of going check, running through them, and continuing that process. If I go back to here, though, we can go to labs, and you'll see the labs that we have available to us. Yeah, so I mentioned around the knowledge of basic commands and navigation. It's saying these hardware requirements. I'm not sure how sticky that is, but I'm sure most of us should have those resources. And then also it should say about Chrome as well, but we'll leave that there. But basically any of your operating systems, you'll see here that we still have our cut down KubeCon Cloud Native Special Edition, deploy K10, backup a data service, delete some data and recover it using K10. Got Lab 1, which is building your first Kubernetes cluster, build a Kubernetes application. So whether that be MySQL, Postgres, or Mongo, and then backing up that. And then if I go into here, you'll see there's some prereqs. We've got the blog post reviewing Kubernetes concepts and building a Kubernetes cluster. Then you've got me running through that lab video overview. So walking through it with you from a hands-on point of view, the bit that I wanted to show in this session, but didn't get round to it because I left it running too long. And then some slides as well that enable you to build your first Kubernetes cluster as well. And this is where I think it's interesting, is that I want to be able to take some of these resources and bring them locally. So what you're going to learn from a theory point of view is, or what is the control plane within Kubernetes? What is Kubernetes from an API and desired state configuration? What is a pod? What is a replica set, a deployment, a service, a namespace, a volume, a job, daemon set, stateful set, and then we get hands-on, and then we actually get that. And all of the other labs go the same way. They'll give you some theory up front, so you're not just going in blind, and then you'll get to learn a lot more about what that looks like. But yeah, I'm super interested in the feedback on not only learning.kasten.io as a way of enabling the community to get hands-on with some data services and stateful workloads within Kubernetes, but also just in general get hands-on with Kubernetes. But then also around this active project. You see here that this is a bit different to the video that you saw in the demo, but I've added in some other areas that generally will deploy two clusters, data services on one side, Kasten K10 on both. And then the idea is that we build a Kubernetes cluster out of this, a Kasten K10 multi-cluster dashboard that enables us to manage both. And we can take this data and restore it to this without too much hassle. And being able to demo that in a very easy environment is really the focus there. But yeah, you can see here we've got some active issues. So by all means, contributors, if you're familiar with Minikube or have some other ideas around data services, if you're a specialist in a particular data service that I haven't mentioned, would love to incorporate that into this open source project. Everything's public. Go and fork it. You can see that it's being actively worked on. I've also written a blog on this at vzilla.co.uk, really walking through what it is and how it looks. A bit more about Arcade in there as well, and some of the add-ons that I've used, basically giving you an overview of the whole project. But yeah, hopefully that was useful. Feedback in the comments down below would be awesome. But yeah, any feedback on this or learning.kasten.io would be awesome. But my biggest ask is go and give it a try. Don't put it off. That learning curve isn't as steep as it maybe seems to begin with. You just got to go and get hands-on, and I think that's my biggest bit of advice is that. With that, thanks for watching. Also, you can get me on Twitter at MichaelCade1. Again, if there's any questions there, I'm generally hovering around quite a bit. Just to close out, just to have a look here, QR code. I can't remember where that takes you, so that'll be a surprise. I'm pretty sure it will take you to a landing page to get you either to learning.kasten.io or to a landing page that gets you access to Kasten K10 free. Project Pace, Cubester is another session that I might do in the future around identifying, validating and evaluating your Kubernetes storage as an open source project. Canister is focused on an application data management framework. So being able to protect your native data services and dump the data into an object storage. So things like Postgres has PG dump, so using that to offload that out. And then Arcade that I mentioned, another awesome open source package manager, application marketplace, however you want to call it. But this consists of a lot of different CLIs that we seem to have to install on all of our dev workstations, but also some really handy tools in there as well that might come in useful. But yeah, with that, thanks very much, and hopefully that was useful.